All right, let's talk about Brazil, because this week, the country is right in the middle of a perfect storm. We're talking about some serious domestic political drama, a full-blown international trade dispute, and somehow a vibrant cultural pulse that just refuses to quit. It's a really complex balancing act, and the stakes could not be higher. So let's get into it. So you gotta ask yourself, how does one country juggle all of this at the same time? You've got a former president placed under house arrest, a sudden trade war with a major partner, and yet, right in the middle of all that chaos, the beat of Samba and a real push for social progress just keeps going. That's the big question we're gonna break down in this explainer. So where did this all start? Well, believe it or not, it all kicked off with a single court order. But this wasn't just any court order. This was the first domino that set off a chain reaction, spilling way beyond Brazil's borders and putting its national sovereignty right to the test.
And here's the bombshell itself. A Supreme Court justice issues a surprise order. Former President Jair Bolsonaro is to be placed under house arrest. And why? Well, it's to make sure he stands trial for his alleged role in a plot to overturn the 2022 election results. You can imagine this one judicial act immediately lit a massive political fire.
And you better believe the international reaction was immediate and it was fierce. Bolsonaro's biggest ally, U.S. President Donald Trump, did not hold back. He called the whole thing a politically motivated witch hunt. And just like that, the stage was set for a major diplomatic showdown. And things escalated, incredibly fast. First, the court issues its order. Almost instantly, the U.S. retaliates with these huge 50% tariffs. And what does Brazil do? President Lula's government stands its ground, defending the independence of its own courts, even as it was bracing for a huge economic hit. So you've got two completely different stories here, right? From the U.S. perspective, the tariffs weren't just about Bolsonaro's prosecution. They also pointed to Brazil's push for a BRICS currency, which they see as a direct challenge to the dollar. But for Brazil, this was a clear violation of their national sovereignty. They called it what it was, an unacceptable use of economic power for political reasons. President Lula really drove this point home with a single, powerful word. He said, Brazil is not a republiqueta, a banana republic. The message was crystal clear. Brazil will not be told what to do. But he also kept the door open for dialogue to try and fix the crisis. Okay, so while all this political drama is playing out on the world stage, there is a whole other, really intense battle happening right at home. Let's shift gears and talk about the economy, because Brazil is fighting tooth and nail to get inflation under control. 15%. Just let that number sink in for a second. That is Brazil's main interest rate. It's called the Selic, and the central bank is holding it at a 20-year high. Now, the goal is pretty simple, but it's also painful. You gotta crush inflation and get it back down to that 3% target. But this whole strategy is sparking a really fascinating debate inside Brazil. On one side, you have the central bank. They're totally independent, and they're saying, look, we have to keep rates this high for a very prolonged period. But on the other side, you've got the finance minister, Fernando Haddad, who's arguing, hey, wait a minute, this is more restrictive than necessary, and he thinks it's choking off economic growth.
And then, right in the middle of this huge internal debate, bam, the tarifaço, the tariff shock hits. Suddenly, over a third, 36% to be exact, of all Brazilian exports to the U.S. are getting hammered by that punishing 50% tariff. This puts an incredible amount of pressure on really important industries like beef and coffee.
But okay, here's where it gets really interesting. Despite all the political drama, despite the trade war, Brazil's financial markets have been surprisingly calm. The currency's holding steady, the stock market's even gone up. So why? Well, a lot of analysts think that that same 15% interest rate that's causing all the debate at home is acting like a magnet, attracting a flood of foreign money and basically creating a buffer against all the chaos.
You know, with all this talk of politics and finance, it can be easy to miss the other story that's unfolding. It's a story about resilience, about identity, and about the quiet, steady power of culture, which is kind of acting like a national lifeline in these really turbulent times.
And get this, even with everything going on, the country's cultural heart was just beating strong. The entire nation celebrated the 115th birthday of Samba legend Adoniran Barbosa. After being gone for 10 years, Rio's LGBTQIA+ rights conference came back with over 700 delegates. And on the other side of the world, Brazilian artists were making a huge splash at the world's biggest arts festival. It's a country that's looking inward to its soul and at the same time outward to the world. And all of this really gets at this crucial idea of soft power. It's not about having the biggest army or the strongest economy. It's about influence. It's about attracting people through your culture, your values, your diplomacy. So when Brazil sends theater troops to a festival in Edinburgh, sharing their food and their language, they're exercising that soft power, building bridges on a global stage. So let's pull all this together. You have these three incredibly powerful forces all happening at once: a fierce defense of political sovereignty, a high-stakes economic balancing act, and this vibrant cultural diplomacy. And all of it leads us to the single biggest question facing Brazil today.
Can the country's defiant stand for its own sovereignty and its real push for social progress, like that rights conference, can that coexist with the need for stable global partnerships and the investor confidence that, for now, those high interest rates are providing? That is the fundamental challenge, and honestly, the answer is going to define Brazil's path forward. Thanks for joining us for this explainer.